Sub-Saharan Africa's biggest slum is noisy, chaotic and unhealthy. There's violence, robberies, carjackings, vigilantes. On some days, murder victims left on display. There are no proper drains and no rubbish collection. There are stinking latrines and open sewers. Malaria and typhoid are common. The death rate for under-5s here is 3 times Nairobi's as a whole.
We have a growing science base that tells us that among the many things that children learn early in their life is a sense of safety and a sense of threat. And we know that children who are in unstable or in threatening situations develop adaptive mechanisms to cope with that. And one of the more interesting things that's been illustrated by this work is the extent to which children who live in violent, threatening environments overinterpret threat in circumstances that other children, as they're growing up, might see as neutral. And this is adaptive. If you live in a violent, threatening environment, it is good for you to kind of have a short fuse.
Preschool is a safe space for the kids, somewhere they can develop peacefully and, in theory, become less violent adults. But many parents can't afford the $10 a month fees.
The sun is there. The sun is there.
But preschool isn't just about avoiding stress. It's also about stimulating young brains when they're developing most rapidly. Interaction with caring adults is essential for healthy development. 30 years ago, Rabia was a working mum from an Istanbul shantytown. Baby daughter Ceren, well, there was a creche and relatives. But in 1983, Rabia and Ceren became part of another famous study. There was now preschool for Ceren, and Rabia was trained to interact, play, and read more.
These lessons are sharing moments. It is interesting. When I look at a new paper, a new book, I remember those days. I loved the smell of these papers, and it gave me a good start to read another book. It is not a lesson to me. It is fun with my mother. This is the special thing, I think.
For over 2 decades, researchers followed as many of the group as they could. They compared the children to peers in a control group whose mothers had not been trained.
Young adults who had the early intervention were more successful than the other group, and this was really a remarkable finding.
The child, of course, comes into the world with many gifts, but they need to be developed. The synapses in the brain need to be developed. The feelings need to be developed. The ability to have social contact needs to be developed. The creative elements need to be developed. The language needs to be developed. And you can't leave it till 5 or 6 years old. The evidence is overwhelming that if you give them better stimulation in the early years and health and education and nutrition, that if you can get to the kids in those years, then your task in primary, secondary and tertiary is much better. And so it is not a waste of money, it's an investment.
The economic argument for early child development has gained enormous strength, and of course it's very persuasive to governments because it's about how much money they might get back on their investment. And I'm not going to discount that as an argument, but it cannot be the basic argument. It cannot be the main argument. It doesn't give enough emphasis on children in the here and now and making sure they have quality experiences that are right for them in the present. The main argument must be a human rights argument. Governments ignore the early years at their peril. It's a curious thing that most people recognise just what the importance of the early years are in everyday life with their own children, and spend huge amounts of attention trying to get it right during those precious years of the early years. But in policy terms, actually, the early years have always been neglected. And failing to look for effective ways of improving children's life prospects and their quality of life now, which is that human rights principle, is something that governments cannot ignore.
Yo tengo un sueño.
I have a
Sabemos
dream.
que la pobreza es
We know
producto
that
de la
poverty is a
desnutrición,
product of
de una
malnutrition,
inadecuada
poor
educación, de una
education,
inadecuada
and poor
estimulación,
stimulation.
y de allí
And from
creemos,
this, we
de
believe
eso,
that
desde ahí
investment in
creemos de que
education,
es
health, and
importante
nutrition
la
is
inversión
important.
en
And we
educación,
believe in
salud,
the early
nutrición,
stimulation of our children.
en
We are
estimulación temprana de
convinced
nuestros
we
niños.
should work with
Estamos
children from
convencidos
the earliest
que
age.
trabajando con los
And we're
niños
going to
desde la más
form a new
temprana edad,
society of children.
vamos a formar una nueva sociedad de niños. Vamos a
We'll
construir una
build
nueva
a new
generación
generation
de
of
niños
children. They'll
que
be
van a
more
ser niños más
successful and
exitosos,
prosperous children, and they'll
prósperos,
contribute
y van a
effectively
contribuir
towards a peaceful
eficazmente
future
en la
for our country.
pacificación de nuestro país.
Today, Jeren's a successful architect. She has her own child. She's passing on the parenting skills her mother was taught to the next generation.
My mother say something, and I believe it. Now my son, I want him to trust me too. The importance of education. It starts before the school. Nobody has this chance before. We had this chance, and we go further. They give us a road to walk.
Wouldn't most of these other children have caught up in the end anyway?
No. No, on the basis of what we know, on the basis of research, indeed they do not. If left on their own, they do not really make it in life. What is more likely to happen is reproducing the poverty and the same kind of life. The big lesson here is by improving children's early environment, immediate environment, we can offset the detrimental effects of poverty in the world and possibly even of violence.
I'm not saying that science has all of the answers to everything that ails all societies around the world in early childhood, but there's no question at all, that we're learning more and more about how the early foundations for learning and physical and mental health and behavioral regulation, which includes the possibility of violent behavior later on, the foundations are built in early childhood. What the basic principles of neuroscience tell us is that it's better to get brain development right from the beginning than to try to come in and fix it later. And if we build a strong foundation in the very beginning of life, we get much better outcomes in the long run, and for actually less money, less cost, than the much greater price that's paid for trying to fix things down the road